So good evening and welcome to our Opens Room session, which is today, tomorrow and somewhere in between. And I'd like to welcome artists Daryl Giorgio and Rebecca Tolley Giorgio and Joe and Jed and Teresa from the L8 group, who are going to talk about their current collaboration. Just to give some context, I'm Liz Viviora and I'm Open Eye Gallery's Head of Social Practice, and I'm going to be kind of the host for this evening's session. So just as a bit of housekeeping, just so you know, if people did have questions, wherever this gets uploaded, please send those on and we can get those questions back over to the artists and the groups, and we can keep that conversation going. But it should be up on our YouTube channel shortly. So for tonight's discussion, Daryl Giorgio and Rebecca Tolley Giorgio, just to give some context, are lens-based artists and photographers. Their work explores the notions of cultural memory, often examining the psychogeography of how places feel, the tension between truth, fiction, history, and identity. And their new collaboration involves a series of pictures set in Liverpool 8, made in association with Granbury residents in the period before, during, and after the lockdown. Today, tomorrow, and somewhere in between consists of an interlinked array of constructed photo, text, and audio works and portraits concerned with people, place, and time. And you can see it from today on our digital window at the Open Eye Gallery. Now, this new work also sees artists build up from a previous project called The World Lived Here L8, which was hosted by Granbury 4 Streets Community Land Trust as part of Open Eye Gallery's previous socially engaged programme, which was called Culture Shifts, and resulted in an exhibition in 2017. Now, Culture Shifts was a city region-wide programme of socially engaged photography commissions by Open Eye Gallery and a host of cross-sector partners, exploring how communities and artists can come together to co-author culture. Now, as the original creative producer of the Culture Shifts programme, what's been really fascinating for me is to witness how over the past 5 years or so, either through continued partnership work and or the passion or drive of the artists and communities involved, nearly all of those original projects have been able to continue in some way, or new projects have developed as a result of the initial programme. So for me, it's a real testament to the appetite of this type of work, and it's why it's so nice to be able to invite you all back tonight to talk about projects old and new. So with that in mind, I'd basically love to hand over to you guys. So if all of our speakers could just briefly introduce themselves, and then I think Daryl and Rebecca are going to give us a bit of a presentation, and then we'll hear from everybody about their work through that, hopefully. So I don't know if Daryl and Rebecca, you want to go first? I think you're muted. There we go.
Thank you, Liz. Thanks for that kind introduction. Yeah, I'm Rebecca Tolley Giorgio, and
I'm Daryl Giorgio.
We are artists
and photographers at heart, really. And we'd just like to thank everybody who's kind of helped us before, during, and after, and some of the participants who can't log in. So we'd just like to say hello to all through and thank you for being here. But we've got a presentation this evening, and before we do that, I'll hand back and let some of our lockdown and our previous collaborators for the Culture Shifts exhibition introduce themselves, if that's okay.
Yeah, Joe and Therese, do you want to introduce yourselves?
I'm Teresa McDermott. I'm a Granby resident and the chair of the Community Land Trust currently. That's about it, I think.
I'm Joe Farag, her husband, and I'm recently retired, and I'd like to say enjoying life, but it's difficult at the moment because I'm used to getting up early, getting to work and getting back, having things thrown at me. But getting there, getting back to some sort of normality.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Teresa. Jed, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, good evening. My name is Jed. I'm a Toxteth resident, have been since 2015. I've got a background in photography and artist development, but for the past 5.5 years, I've been working for a local charity that works with victims of modern slavery.
Thanks, Jed. And then Waltrude, we think.
I am.
Oh, are you there?
I'm here.
Yay! This is great news. We
And
just
I can see you, but I believe you can't see me.
we can't see you, but we can hear you loud and clear.
Fine. All right, I'll talk. I had to do a little bit of running up and down, yeah, to eventually work it out. Okay, I am Waltraud Boxel, a resident of, as the previous speaker said, also Toxteth, yeah, or Liverpool 8, since 1985. I used to work at the university as a lecturer in education. So my connection with Granby 4 has been initially through my work as a teacher educator and knowledge of schools in the area. Granby School, for instance, yeah, primary school, was on our patch when we had to place students at the time for teaching practice. My involvement with the Culture Shift program 5-6 years ago with Darrell and Rebecca was based on precisely that part of my biography, yeah, my background in education in the inner city of Liverpool. I think, yeah, I have maintained an interest in the local area, given that when I arrived, it was a part of the world that was considered to be, if I am quite honest, the words I heard then were said, the pits. How could you ever think of moving to a place that was just the pits? Because at the time, largely in lots of the media, the decline of Liverpool had reached many national as well as international publications, yeah, that portrayed an image that certainly was deplorable and pretty despicable. So at the time, that was what it was. I, with my commitment to multiracial and multicultural education, didn't find this a deterrent. I maintained this interest, and what I can witness and say now, I am completely committed to what has been happening over the last 30 years in this part of the city, but not only in this part altogether, but in particular in Liverpool 8. And I think the real culture shift took place after the European Capital of Culture event in 2008, but also then, as part of this dynamic, the Granby Street, 4 Streets wins of the Turner Prize in 2015. So, sorry, it was a little bit long, but here is my interest in the local area, and I maintain it as much as I can.
No, that's great. Thank you, Waltraud. That's a really good insight, actually, for people who maybe don't know much about Granby in the area and the projects that have kind of been before. So thank you for that. I think we're going to hand over to Darrell and Rebecca now, who's going to show us some of the project work. You got it on mute again. There we go. Thank you.
Hello again, everybody. I'd just like to thank all of our collaborators and those that we're yet to collaborate with, because the L8 residents or Granby residents, I've never heard anybody call it Toxteth, who isn't from a particular time. It's always Granby or L8, really, or the Triangle. So thank you to the residents past, present, and hopefully future, because they're the real artists, placemakers, curators, and archivists of these kind of Granby spaces and places. I've got notes from many people who should be here and wanted to kind of join in tonight. So we're trying to summarize lots of those things in the race that we take you through over the next 15 minutes.
And we can see Waltraud now.
And we can see Waltraud.
Yay!
But as you can see and hear, we're collaborating with a very dynamic and vocal, proactive set of partners, and we follow in their wake. we can't keep up. We're bringing very little to the table bar our kind of visual literacy and skills, really. It really is a privilege to work with these people because they are beyond dynamic. And it's sometimes embarrassing to be in their company to see how much they achieve. So we'll try to keep up in their slipstream. But we're really just attempting to collaborate with people and document or represent people fairly. And assist with the telling of people's stories to some very small, modest degree. We did that with your project, Culture Shifts, which was called
The World Lived Here, L8.
The World Lived Here. So we'll go back, forwards, and then hopefully kind of open up a discussion about what's possible, because like many people, we've been in a stasis and a hiatus, personally, privately, and because of the lockdown pandemic, a sense of time has collapsed. So it feels like it was only yesterday. And when people say this was 6 years ago, that's a real shock. So I think poor old Teresa and Joe have been waiting to say, well, what are you going to do now then for 6 years? So we're really sorry it's been that long. It feels like 6 months, but we'll try and get to that resolution with some of the guys here tonight. Okay.
Okay, so as we said, we are Rebecca Tolley Giorgio and Dara Giorgio. So we're largely known as Giorgio and Tolley in an artist duo context. And we are interested in?
Yeah, how places feel and cultural memory. Now, what does that mean? We'll try and give you an example of that. We're also exploring this notion of what Waltrud's really interested in, and certainly something Granby CLT have kind of really nailed, how places feel. We were just fascinated when we went there to see the transformation between truth, fiction, history and identity. And if nothing else, Granby has got a spirit of a place. And what is the spirit of a place? I think, is it Latin? Genius loci. I heard people talking about the spirit of Granby, and I was just fascinated with that. And it took us off on a trajectory that made a new body of work, which was born of conversations and ultimately photographic exchanges, which were above and beyond conventional documentary. We made picture postcards with people, and effectively we'll race through what that is a little bit later on. But we're interested in placemaking, representation, people, history, memory, identity, and much in between.
So yeah, so sharing work and experiences, which we aim to do from a global and local perspective, and set within wider public and social contexts. So
people can read, so we'll let them go through. There's keywords: collaboration, relationships, building those, and co-authoring work, which is incredibly difficult to do, and therefore it's a very slow montage, layers process. So why the new project's called Today, Tomorrow and Somewhere in Between. Why? Because pictures can't talk. And what do we mean by that?
Well, people might say pictures do talk to a large extent in terms of how people decipher images, but literally speaking, they don't talk. So we've been interested in the amalgamation of sound and image for quite some time now, but it's something that really came to the fore when we were doing the work in Granby, because it just felt like a natural progression to start having conversations. Obviously, that was the main thing for us, is to build a relationship with people. And so sound and recording became very much an integral part of that.
We were aware that a picture doesn't tell a whole story. And as image makers for the new projects, born of what we learned in the previous projects, we ask ourselves these questions. And it's something we've brought to the other project. Why are we doing this? How to collaborate, because we realized that we were limited in our collaborative skills previously. And how do you help others tell their own story without invading their stories? How do you facilitate the telling of photographic and stories through images with people who sometimes don't have the skills to do that? So questions, our starting point, whether this is conceptual or non-visual.
Well, how do you photograph a memory? How do we document how places feel? And how places feel is a recurring theme that's very important to us. How do you capture emotional space, images in the mind, and how do you document abstract ideas or concepts photographically?
So common themes, representation, everything's about representation. How can a photographer represent somebody else? They can't. I don't want to get into the kind of conversation about documentary or snatching souls, but we're very aware of these issues, and it's something that's fascinated us, and it's facilitated a number of collaborations with some residents in Granby L8 who now find themselves working and collaborating with us in other areas, and we'll show some work to that effect. So there's a number of spin-off projects, but one project in particular is concerned with who's watching who.
Who's watching who? Yes, so this is a piece of work. This is a world premiere, actually. So you're going to see
a world premiere,
an extract that nobody's actually seen yet.
And it's concerned with whose images anyway. But Waltrude's dulcet tones might be recognisable in this kind of piece of work,
right? So
and various people's eyeballs as well.
Paranoia.
There's no such thing as an innocent photograph. Watching people and their faces, spaces, their media algorithms, authorship and ownership, documenting the big and small event from pandemic to party, famine to festivity, flipping the screen as we frame and click, smile, repeat, the family albums of our imagined past. Is that the truth? Hear it, feel it. Be the three wise monkeys, pictorial and proverbial. See no, hear no, and speak no. Kinno, I. Suspects on the hallucination. Remember, you can't take a picture that tells the whole story. You can't photograph equality, injustice, or truth. You can see it, recognize it, but you could, if you really tried, if you cared, you could actually do something about it. What's your position? Do you knowingly turn your back on the real scene and participate in this collective illusion for the sheep? More than this room for the truth and creative. So that's a composition. I spy with my eyes. Because nobody knows what the truth is. It's magic. There is no such thing as an innocent photograph. There is no such thing as an innocent photograph.
So we wanted to show people what we do and what we've done effectively elsewhere. And as I say, some residents, this is nothing to do with the L8 projects. We were so excited to work with people that they've become friends and in effect collaborated with us on a number of other projects. But the basic premise for us as image makers is there are ethical concerns, not only philosophical or societal concerns, because we realize you're very limited as to what you can do with your visual literacy and your visual language, your skills. And we're interested in the concerns of our time, but we only have questions, we don't have answers. And ultimately we kind of realize our limitations. So our new project is going to be concerned with people, place and time. So it's hardly kind of new or original, but it's very much kind of the people, places and times, which have been extraordinary. And I think the word unprecedented is used far too often. But that delay in the follow-up project that we had has meant that we've been locked in our houses effectively for 18 months, and our relationship to ourselves and each other's has changed a great deal. And I'd like to just share with you some pictures and not talk, but let you see some of the workshop images that have been delivered in that pre-process before the second project starts. And without being too literal, they resonate obviously with the NHS, nurses' uniforms, all sorts of things that were prevalent at that time. So if you take yourselves back a year, my sister is a nurse working at the front line of the pandemic. And
as is, my sister-in-law is also,
where does she work?
in Swansea.
Swansea, yes, Swansea and Walsall, the great glamorous Swansea and Walsall. But effectively, our conversations and our worlds were very limited and internal. There were internal monologues where the wallpaper or your Polaroid that hadn't been kind of played with for 30 years suddenly become very important. Your Rubik's Cube found its kind of way out of the box. And we found that people were having very similar conversations, although very different experiences. Ultimately, there was a different relationship and set of connections that was to do with the tyranny of Zoom and remote. But in effect, some of the image sequencing workshops and some of the photo editing workshops, I'd like our colleagues to show and talk about. And obviously that's perhaps difficult in Waltrud's case, but perhaps Jed could talk us through some of the work that he's done in that kind of lockdown period. Okay, want to talk through that?
So our original collaboration, as we talked about, was The World Lived Here L8, and obviously this new work is building on that work, which obviously because of the pandemic was delayed. But here's a tiny reminder for those who didn't attend Culture Shifts what it was about. It was about approaching historical memory. People are quite, like we all are, nostalgic for the past, but it takes many various forms.
Genius Loci, it's called The Spirit of a Place, and it's somewhere that has a lot of spirit, and there's lots of stories to be told, which are many and various and layered.
What we really tapped into was the strength of the feeling of the people in Granby itself. It does make you reevaluate your own work, I think, about the value of relationships with people in communities and to allow people to have their own voice. It is about collaboration, and I think doing a project like this really underlines that.
So I wondered if Waltrud, because you haven't got your work, could you talk us, same with Joe and Teresa, perhaps through that work? Is that possible?
Yes, of course it is. I was trying to remember what it said on the postcard, because on the postcard that I was given a little while later, unfortunately the text wasn't there. Anyhow, I came and experienced the world of primary education in the Granby 4th Street area quite frequently, and I must highlight my commitment to the inner city and education in the inner city from the start, as indeed I encountered many of the students on the PGCE courses sharing my commitment. However, it was not an easy choice, and many of the experiences students had when teaching in Liverpool 8 were tough. They were tough, and they were really tested to the very bone with regards to their commitment. I also, I remember one of my students, he was in one of the church schools in Liverpool 8, experiencing difficulties in the staff room because he was reading The Guardian. And that seemed to be not the right kind of exposure of a student teacher to the world outside. However, it was a very, very testing time, one that when Durrell and Rebecca approached me, was very keen to pass on and share with them as my experience as a teacher and a teacher educator in the area. It has continued, my interest in their work, in Durrell's and Rebecca's work, has continued, and I felt at the time when they were working on it, how very clearly they took their need to represent what was there as much from a street angle, or an angle of the people from the area, rather than their own image or their own their own idea of what it might be living in the area. So I learned to respect their work very much, and their processes that I remember were quite telling. And yes, they came back, and Rebecca said, "Oh, I want to take a few more photographs. I wasn't happy with what I've done last time I was here." So, you know, that shows a great deal of respect for the people you are trying to represent, and this is a vital element of a socially engaged photographer. You know, you are socially engaged because you want to show what maybe people who are in the area themselves are less likely to be able to show. So that is a very fine part of my relationship with them. That is what I remember. That's what I remember of the time then.
The check's in the post.
Yeah, the check's in the post, Walter. Now we'll get a roasting by Joe and Teresa, but it's okay.
Of course, it's different now, you know, now because things always move on. So the dynamic is a very fluid one, as the word suggests. And when they asked me what I'd done during lockdown, and I started to think about the early parts of the lockdown, I remember reading a book that I had acquired quite a few years previously. And as a result of the book called The Mushroom at the End of the World, with a subtitle on the possibility of life in capitalist ruins. Here is the book. I began to think through the implications of entanglements. The four major parts in the book, yeah, are encapsulated in the terms enabling entanglements. Due to these entanglements, we begin to actually engage and see an area, a place we live in, with very kind of hopefully multiple eyes, not just only our own. So in the lockdown, here are some of my images that you can see that I passed on to Darrell and Rebecca, and they show a variety of inside and outside images. The inside ones are the views of the face painted fish talking and looking. It comes from a book. It wasn't myself, but because I did all kinds of things with students and with young children in schools, you know, face painting was one of the activities. And it was just something that kept me entertained whilst I was on my own at home. I looked through my books and tried to remember some of the times I had with young children as well as with students. The two images at the top right, yeah, they are from a textile in my bathroom, and it's showing Michelle Obama on the telephone with a caption, "Don't stand in my light." It's a very kind of a nice little textile I once picked up in Cape Town. And the other little saying in the circle with the sunglasses says, "I never go to bed without washing the dishes." So the internal, of course, during lockdown, inevitably you had to concentrate on food and what to cook and what to eat. Yeah, and as I am over 75, yeah, I had good friends who came and did the shopping for me, as I was it was recommended that I shouldn't be going to doing the shopping myself. So that was what happened then. the post box, the red pillar box, is in my neighborhood with the German church. And then, of course, there is the Jürgen Klopp cutout in the window. You have a nice connection, a link with the German church and the German manager. These were just images I photographed on my daily little tours around the area, yeah, when I was doing my 1 hour exposure to the outside world. So there was a kind of tension of the inside and the outside, yeah, what I do inside and what I do outside. And the outside is, of course, what continues to interest me still, and that's why I take lots of photographs when I go downtown, or I've recently made a little photo sequence of shots I took of Princess Boulevard, which I think is a magnificent urban walkway and a street that leads straight through Liverpool 8 and from the beginning to Princess Park. And it's such a wonderful street. And I have been thinking about it, why I think this is so. It's because there are no shops. You don't stop there to shop. Yeah, you walk because you go from home to the city, or you just go out for a wander, like you see Somali women, you know, sometimes wander and sitting down for a little chat with each other. And then the cyclists come. It's just been renovated during lockdown. And when it opened, yeah, it was such a celebration. And I often go there for my little constitutionals.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's a lot, and all interesting. Your flaneuring and your psychogeography.
I am a flaneur. Yeah.
Flaneur. I wondered if Joan could
Flaneurs.
give us an update on the Wintergone, because originally 6 years ago it's being built, and obviously we've missed this wonderful time. We've missed too long, and I wondered if you could give us an update on what's changed really from the original Open Eye show, where you had this photograph you can hopefully talk us through, to today really, and now.
It was when it's so long ago I don't quite remember.
Yeah, we know.
I remember, I think you were asking us about how living in L8 as either Joe as a child or me when I arrived here when I was 18. And yes, the thing that I found that was so different here, the atmosphere was so different. It's the city as well, not just L8. And actually thinking I was coming from London to the provinces and I didn't want to do that really. But then within 3 weeks, I decided I wanted to stay. And that was to do with like only ever having got 3 taxis in my life in London. But I was getting 3 a day here. They were that cheap. Nightclubs everywhere that were really cheap and always in old Georgian houses. So some of them are listed there. Silver Sands and the Somali and the Gladray and the Yoruba and the Nige and the Igbo and the Casablanca nearer town. And it was just amazing, you know, nothing to get in, or 50p if they thought you were a student, and that was they'd tax the students but not the locals. And that was all fabulous. And a good friend of mine was in Cozy Fly, who was on TCR, Toxteth Community Radio, which is now coming back. It's now been on the airwaves again. But he used to play, he was really into African guitar music, particularly from Zambia and Zaire, I think. But, you know, I've written there, well, you've written there, but something I said was about his voice sounding like someone like Gil Scott-Heron in its richness when he spoke on the radio. But those were my memories of the music and L8 when I came here from the first 10, 20 years I was here. And Joe can tell you about his bit there.
Yeah, we couldn't.
Right.
The cinema's gone, obviously. So I wonder, we were trying to find places that obviously were important to people, but weren't there anymore. So it's very difficult to document a memory.
Mm.
Yeah, the cinema is basically now a garden. One which is wild garden, and then made into a really beautiful wild garden for the children to actually deal with from the school, because it's next to the school. It's a primary school. And the work which is done there was amazing by this French guy and local residents. But anyway, what used to be there was a cinema, and we didn't call it cinemas in the old days. We called them whatever we wanted, but there was no such thing as cinema. It was too posh a word. It was just a picture house. And yes, and the work that people used to use again in those days was the bug house, which was that particular picture house. And although it's hard to remember too much about going back that far because it's a long way, I think the things we used to enjoy there was in between the actual films that were on as well, because that's where the action was. It was on the stage, and that's what it started to involve the audience, because they had things like yo-yo competitions, which a lot of people might know what a yo-yo is, but it's a round thing that goes up and down on a piece of string. And that actually became my nickname. I was called Yo-Yo. And it's, because I was fairly good at it. No, I didn't win any competitions in the bug house, but it was still good. And I used to do things called walking a dog, which is my favorite, of flicking it down and it stays there and rolls forward and rolls back. So they were the memories, and obviously the actual pictures that were on. Sadness now is that everything is constrained to people's houses. People watch films in their houses and on a little screen. Kids walk around with a little screen and don't really make much contact with people. There's very, very little integration on the streets, to be honest. And I think that's one of the things. In a sense, the bug house was like a huge community centre. Maybe we didn't realise it then, but it was very much the way pubs were. They were the community centres for the adults, but they flew down as well. There's very few of them really. And I think that's probably part of the changes, and also the, how can I put it, the lack of community integration outside. I'm not saying people don't agree with things, and I'm not just talking about LA here. I'm talking about probably the rest of the country as well. There appears to be a lack of it, of people getting out in big groups and mixing and chatting and being friendly. So anyway, that's it basically.
That's pretty beautiful. I mean, I don't know if Liz wants to go, but the whole thing about nostalgia, we wanted to have a kind of a combination of that's lost, that kind of melancholy, but also celebration as well. So much of the images were around that time a celebration, as well as I mean, there's new people coming in. I think Michael came in, and Prince Parsley the Cats with his kind of cinema. So there's always this kind of evolution and transition. I mean, we're quite very much interested to know, and it's unfair, you're right, Teresa, to suddenly ask for a 30-year kind of condensed history of L8 in 5 minutes. But I think there's this incredible, unless you've been there, I don't think anybody could possibly understand the curve of the journey up, down and back. It's just been so rapid and impressive in latter times. And that's why I wondered if I could kind of jump with Liz's permission, really, to getting an update on what's happening now with regards to post Wintergone, because we missed the launch of that, obviously. So we're 2 years behind you, at least.
Sorry, was that for us to?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, I think it was just in the months running up to lockdown. We'd started to run quite a few events and workshops and stuff in the Winter Garden. I can't remember the launch date. But it was fantastic, just opening it and having this amazing chandelier that a local artist had done, and we've killed a few trees along the way. We had some problems with kind of getting the temperatures right, but also I think we had some kind of pest there that had an effect. But it still looks gorgeous, and it's been running quite a few events lately. So we've, over the last, I don't know, 4 to 5 months, we've come alive again. You know, it's not constant, but there's people staying there. There's been an artist residency, and there've been sort of different workshops and social events. So it's kind of building back up now. Similarly with the market too. So the market started back again after over a year not operating, started back at the beginning of July.
And that the only time that's not on is Christmas, isn't it? Is that right? Sorry, January.
January, yeah.
And we're hoping to work with you on the next one, or the last one of the year. Any questions?
No, I was just going to say, I was just pointing out for people who might be watching that actually this is us very recently inside the Winter Garden.
It's impressive.
And can you actually, it's a point, because I just need to say, because if you know, people who may be watching this after the fact, tell us what the Winter Garden is. What is the
fair enough, that's a good question.
As well as a bed and breakfast, it's many things.
Well, I think how it came about was the fact that it was 2 buildings next to each other, 2 small terrace houses, which were in so much disrepair, they were collapsed inside right the way through. And that includes the foundations and everything. And the architects came up with an idea to turn it into a huge greenhouse, basically, where people could meet and chat and discuss things, you know, whatever. And also that it would help fund itself in the future by having an Airbnb there. So that actually keeps it going in the future. And it is quite busy, as Teresa says, there are children's workshops, etc., lots of things going on. It's basically one big space, top left-hand side of it, almost like the bedroom in one of the houses is an Airbnb. The rest of it is a huge greenhouse with workshop space, which is just integral to it. And the roof, because that was completely demolished, was gone, is now a glass roof. It's a sliding glass roof. And it really does look like a big greenhouse when you look at it. It's amazing. And it's just
stunning.
something that creates a lot of interest.
Yeah, we wanted to know how much the bed and breakfast was.
Yeah.
Not the exhibition opportunities you were affording the artists, but
and we've got an artist residency. I mean, the aim is to have half the year for artist residency stuff, for want of a better word, and B&B guests. How we balance that is going to be quite difficult, but that's the plan. And the artist residencies, we want to make sure that whilst there will be artists from elsewhere wanting to come and be there, we really want local artists to benefit from that, particularly.
You don't want any more artists turning up. We know. But can you explain?
As an area, Granby is very, and Liverpool 8 as a whole, very watched and studied, and so trying to sort of balance everything, like our wish to have regeneration through the arts, trying to balance that with sort of artists from somewhere else coming and using us as a place, studying us from the inside. You've got to balance those things, haven't you? And that's where we have to be careful that we keep our integrity and don't make the community feel that actually this doesn't feel like our space anymore. So that's the balance we have to make, and I think we can do that. But it's.
Did you do that with the workshops as well? Because you've got these wonderful workshops that run in parallel. You've got some experience of that perhaps with the Granby workshop?
Right, yeah. So the workshops within the Winter Garden before lockdown, they were by and large, quite a lot of them were about local people running them for their own kids to do crafts and stuff with their parents, but also like individual members of the community wanting to do sort of mentoring type workshops for young Black men. That was one of the, examples like that, which it can be used for the community's good. And Granby Workshop is a different beast altogether, but that was a kind of, the Granby Workshop came from Assemble and the CLT, the Community Land Trust. The Turner Prize win led to the need for a workshop. Well, pre-Turner Prize win, the Turner Prize nomination was pre-workshop, because, and the workshop came out of that because they needed to make an exhibition. They needed to make stuff for an exhibition for the stuff that they envisaged going in our houses. So it was all kind of it was all that process really. So you had their designs for the houses working with us for the things we wanted to see in the houses. They understood our vision completely. They worked with us as architects. And then the Turner Prize nomination happened before most of the building work had even started, through their designs for a winter garden. And then they had to set up in one of our empty shops to make a workshop with local people to create all the items that would go in the exhibition for the Turner Prize thing in Glasgow. And then after that, they became a business. Their win was, you only get £25,000, but they kind of reinvested the money into that. And so it became a different organisation. It wasn't Assemble and it wasn't a bit of the CLT. It's a Granby Workshop is a separate organisation that was born of that kind of, that partnership, that collaboration. And they've moved now because they've been so successful. They've moved to a much bigger place.
Obviously, they haven't moved very far, have they?
No.
It felt a wrench.
Yes, it's a few hundred yards away. But the point is, it was old stables. They now employ local people there as well. It's not just the artists that were there originally. And they rent part of the buildings off to local artists at a brilliant cost-effective price. And the artists are made up that it's there because they can afford the monthly rent, which is really low. And it's really helping to develop their crafts, etc. And that's part of the beauty of it. It's they've got many wonderful things about them, and that's one of them. And that's about including. And inclusion is really important.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I mean, Liz, how do you keep up with these guys?
I've just been like really busily writing loads of notes because I've kind of got loads of questions and things I want to ask, but I might save those to the end because it would be really nice to also hear from Jed.
Yeah, well, he's up next.
Kind of, in terms of kind of the brand new stuff that's been happening recently.
That'd be great. Jed, I know you have 500 aliases, so I've gone with your social media alias. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's my Facebook alias, but my Instagram alias is for Troika. So my kind of background, a long time ago, I trained in documentary photography and also did a lot of artist development work in Lancaster and East Lancashire. And sort of gravitated away from that work and worked in local government and charity sector. But I've always sort of maintained my own sort of personal practice. And through the work that I've been doing for the past 6 years with survivors of modern slavery as a outreach caseworker, that sort of meant that I've been travelling throughout the whole of the Northwest. And one of the projects that I've been putting on Instagram over the past few years is kind of very similar to Tom Wood in terms of taking portraits and photographs of my actual day-to-day commute on trains and buses, all on my phone. I've not used a kind of professional photography kit for a long time, but just sort of maintained my own interest in image making through my iPhone or whatever phones that I've had. So to kind of go from being in quite personal spaces and kind of being very intrigued by how people relate to each other, but also how vulnerable people can make themselves in those spaces by being asleep on a train, etc. To then be confronted with lockdown and completely rethinking my kind of professional work in terms of working with clients over the phone rather than doing face-to-face, but also my relationship with kind of just sort of my own space. So as part of the beginning of lockdown, one of the things that I started to do was actually revisit a lot of the work that I did when I was a student and not long after being a student, and was very, very interested in that idea of documentation. So a project that I did as a student was around identifying objects within family photographs, because it was something that came out of a project that I did where my mum suggested that for her, the objects in photographs were as important sometimes as the actual kind of constructed image of the family. And I kind of looked around the flat and that I share with my wife and realized that we've got quite a lot of objects and a lot of stuff. And I kind of thought, how do I sort of almost archive that kind of as an image making exercise, just to kind of for my own interest, really. One of the pieces of software that I use a lot with clients is actually a scanning app. So I can just scan documents and save them. So I thought, rather than kind of trying to create images through traditional photography and traditional sort of kind of documentation, I would actually sort of use a documentation app to kind of create a kind of a graphic narrative, really, and sort of see what that looks like. So I did a lot of experimentation with sort of photographing objects individually. But then I started to think about what that would actually look like in terms of what I was experiencing sort of externally, and from being quite sociable and being in the public realm on a daily basis and engaging with people on a daily basis in the public realm, what that actually felt like during lockdown. So it was very intriguing, sort of living very close to Princes Park, Sefton Park, and those kind of green spaces, which were always places that we just enjoyed and spent time in. The kind of the approach that people were taking to those spaces have still been very, very distant. Kind of like when you were passing people on paths, and people were very kind of awkward about where you would pass and how much space you would give each other. And then when I started to take that kind of experimentation visually through the scanner app and started taking those photographs, what I realized was that it kind of creates a PDF document, which is about A4, but when you actually kind of sort of get closer up, it actually does kind of record pretty much everything that's in the image. And what I realized, that I kind of started to really sort of look at the sort of landscape, but within the landscape pictures in particular, there are sort of individual figures sort of placed within it. So I suppose there was sort of three approaches to that sort of visual response, really. There was the kind of recording of objects that we own as a kind of documentation exercise. There's the sort of relationship to our internal space as a couple. Also kind of learning to be around each other for that amount of time, working around each other and being around each other in that way. But then also that external space of how we were sort of relating to people externally in a new way of being, really. And obviously,
for those who don't know, is it okay for us to kind of mention your partner being a teacher and having
a
full and varied workload like yourself? So
yeah.
I just wondered if you'd like to introduce who's in the image, really, and why you're on a pair of ladders with a scanning app.
So I kind of was sort of experimenting with portraiture a little bit. So that is a picture of my wife sort of asleep one afternoon. It was at a weekend, not during a work day. But we've actually, I'm not actually on a ladder. We've actually got steps going into our bedroom from the room that I use as an office and kind of workspace. So yeah, so that was it was just sort of taking what would in traditional photography would probably look like quite sort of boring, traditional, quite basic snapshots. But actually through that app, kind of it creates quite an interesting language and a sort of interesting dynamic. And I think it was very much about, rather than taking things either in black and white, sort of traditional photography, or in color, that time when I was sort of doing a lot of this stuff, it did feel very black and white in terms of your attitude to being out in the community, or what you could and couldn't do. It felt very one or the other. So the kind of visual language that I was experimenting with, and the kind of technology that I was experimenting with in terms of looking at that, sort of felt very much in keeping in terms of what I was feeling internally as well, kind of like from that emotional perspective.
That's really interesting. And for these guys, you 1,000 years ago, you were a traditional documentary photographer, weren't you? And,
yeah.
I think you can give disclosure that you were one of my students in 1763, and I ruined your career, made you into an artist. Taking
94 to 97 it was, yeah. So basically, yeah, we'd sort of kept in touch, but not kind of like on a regular basis. And obviously I came to my knowledge of the first part of the project came quite late in the process to actually get involved, and we just missed out on that as a couple that were interested in sort of being involved in it. And particularly when you then found out that I was living in LA and I'd moved to LA and was living and working here, then that reignited that conversation between ourselves in terms of kind of the work that we've done previously, as kind of that relationship as a student and lecturer, but also just me being able to share that journey that I was on, sort of visually moving away from traditional documentary style photography that was taking on my iPhone out in the public, to a much more kind of, I suppose, sort of fine art practice that I was sort of experimenting with as a student as well.
Well, it's interesting. Everybody came together for that event, and then a couple of years later, everyone's locked away, and now there's the opportunity to come back together, hopefully.
Yeah.
Through the next project. Have you got any questions, Liz, you'd like to ask to the artists themselves?
Yeah, I do. I mean, as I said, I was kind of busily writing notes down before, but there's some things that kind of that kept cropping up, and it's actually a question from my colleague Declan, because everything we were focusing so much on the serendipity of this particular place of LA, and like what brings people there. There's kind of like the powerful culture, the local sense of community. And you can see why these relationships have developed and built and also sustained, which I think is really important. But Declan had a question, which was, do you think these types of projects could be done in another postcode? What would change about it? Would it even exist?
I think there are only a few places. I mean, I had this conversation with Rebecca, because Rebecca might be best place to say it, but my line was, there are certain places that Rebecca's drawn to Liverpool 8, and I am, because it's very much like B21. I've got a similar experience of...
What's B21, Darryl? For
oh,
those
sorry.
people who are watching who might not know.
I'm a Handsworth kid, and I felt like I fitted in. Birmingham, yeah. You see, I think Handsworth's the centre of the universe, like Joe thinks L8's the centre of the universe. But there's a universality to that. They're the same but different. They've had their spaces of trauma that have coped and thrived. So I just think there are some places which are magnetic. And of course, they exist everywhere, and we all think they're marvellous. But I think they are particularly interesting places. Handsworth, Toxteth, as was, St Paul's. Yeah, I mean, obviously, wherever anybody lives at home, of course they can be done, these projects, because they're about.
If I could just give a quick correction.
Oh yeah, go on.
I do not think L8 is the sense of the universe. I know Goodison Park is the same.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Oh, but you know, places move, don't they? Our love and our families move, including Everton. They could be in the on the waterfront. Will you feel the same way? Is it how the place feels or where it is? And I think that's a great answer, Joe. Does your love go to the new place because that's where your family is, or does it stay and resonate in that location, that postcode?
Yeah, and you and obviously and your experiences as well of a place, because although you know, as Darryl said, you know, he had that commonality, and in fact Dayla's family, when we went and talked to Dayla Singh and his family, it turned out that they used to go to your dad's chip
Yeah,
shop.
they knew my dad and were from Handsworth and knew his chip shop. So there's only 7 families in B21 and 14 families in L8 clearly who are all kind of related.
But it's also that okay, so I grew up in Wales, and there's a word that the Welsh have that is difficult to translate, but it's basically hiraeth, which is a sense of longing. And I in the post or during and post my being an undergraduate art student, I came to L8 in '85, very shortly after the riots, and I subsequently worked in Birkenhead for some time in the late '80s, and I've always had this real draw to Liverpool, a really intense draw to it. So when we came to do this project, it really did that for me. Part of it felt like coming home. There was that kind of sense of hiraeth about Liverpool and L8, and I still feel very much like that whenever we come back, and we've been back in recent months as well, and it definitely feels like, you know, coming home, and that's as much about you guys now as the place really for us.
I think it's really interesting, because there's a bit of me that thinks that there are many communities within Liverpool, for example, where they're close knit and you would get a good feel. I actually think that some of it is about the style of the housing. Yeah. So if you knock down terraces and replace them with semi-detached, with places to park your non-existent cars and much wider space between them, the community starts to change and is less tight-knit as a community, just because physically. So by the time you get to places like Menlove Avenue, where you have really big detached houses, there's no community feel at all. So it's basically in the tight spaces that poor people live, where that community spirit is generated. There are parts of Liverpool, maybe in the north of the city, where I don't feel the same buzz that you get in L8, and that is probably to do with the incredible kind of racial and cultural mix, and the fact that it's been the area, whether you be students or someone from the Yemen 120 years ago, or whatever, or seamen over the hundreds of years who've settled in Liverpool 1 and then moving up the hill to Liverpool 8, that creates a very special environment, and so that kind of longevity of the Black community is what creates that sort of different feel as well. So it's complex, but there are tight-knit communities everywhere. But I guess that mixture of people who've moved through the area and up the hill from Liverpool 1 is what makes it different. Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I actually,
Sorry, go on.
I think it would be a really interesting program or project in social anthropology to try another postcode, precisely for the type of characterization Teresa has just and Joe have just offered. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking straight away, what about Norris Green? You know, I mean,
where's Norris Green? Is that near Camberwick Green? I have no idea. My kind of
it's
northeast Liverpool.
Is it? Okay.
It's on the way to out to Croxteth Hall, and it's a vast area of a big working class part of Liverpool, densely populated. None of this new development, as far as I can tell. Occasionally, when I drive out, I would kind of see these parts of Liverpool, and I think, just the idea of trying to do a study of the life in some parts of the not so mixed parts of Liverpool would be a fascinating study. I think it suggests itself to a whole range of approaches, but it is precisely because of there not being this fluidity that Liverpool 8 would have had, and this great mixture of different cultures, different ethnicities, that has enabled at one point a puzzle part of a world that knew how to weld together. And how is it in other well-established parts of the city which have not been quite so much exposed to comings and goings of a population? So this is just my response to this question. Could this project be moved to another postcode?
Yeah, thank you, Waltraud. I think, Jed, did you have something to say as well?
Yeah, I think for me, I think for me, it's about the quality of the conversation that people within this community have with each other, and it's sort of professionally, I've met a lot of advocates for the community. I've been able to engage with service users from the charity that I work with in different aspects of sort of community work within L8 and a lot of the organisations that work here. On a personal level, kind of as I sort of shared before we started, for me coming into L8 as an experience when I first met my wife and we were engaged, it was a place that I always felt at home. It was a place that I always felt like I could come to and get to know and make my home, and it felt like a very comfortable place to sort of go on that journey with. One of the things that I kind of learned straight after moving here was that my family were born on Lodge Lane. I live on Croxteth Road, so it was like about 200 or 300 yards around the corner, and it actually did feel like I'd come home, and that's a very sort of, for me, has been a very powerful experience in terms of living here over the past 6 years, but also just as a resident, just in terms of the projects and the people that I've kind of got to know and become a part of, including this one. It does have just a very, very sort of special feel about it.
Thank you, Jed. I think we are nearly out of time, actually.
Yeah.
But I did want to just round up maybe with one kind of final question, just about kind of what's next, really. Because obviously, this conversation between Darryl and Rebecca and yourselves as residents with OpenEye originally, it did start literally back in 2016. And you've been carrying on this engagement and different conversations, and new projects have been forming, all of which down through lockdown as well, which is a story in itself probably. But the plan, as far as I know, is that you are finally coming back to be artists in residence at the Winter Gardens very soon.
Well, it might not be the Winter Gardens as such, but it's L8, because there's obviously the workshops and all sorts of things, and the market. So it's a compendium of places and spaces where people will be, really. But we're open to the power of kind of a suggestion from others as to what shape that would take place. But what we are doing, or working towards for Christmas as a return, is a photo portrait opportunity for people at the Granby Christmas Market to test the water of going back into physical spaces and
And probably we haven't stolen, no,
No,
we
we
are
haven't
giving you
stolen
back.
Do you want to explain
We
that
are
word?
giving it you back. So,
Yeah,
well,
do you want to
actually,
explain
Joe
that?
should explain this. Joe, can you explain this beautiful, beautiful artifact, because it is an incredible piece.
Yeah, well, I think it's best if you do, because you've had it for so long that I forgot.
Yeah, we stole it. There's a,
We haven't.
It's a 1930s industrial book, I think. Yeah. Is it
there's a wonderful
1930s?
book of photographs which are
Yeah.
from an amateur photography group who were clearly funded by industrialists.
Yeah.
But part of the project is going and kind of breathing life into some of the wonderful archive objects and artifacts, which you can't really recreate or photograph or scan, and having other layers of interpretation and engagement and inclusion.
And you don't find this stuff on Google.
No, you don't find this stuff on Google. So we've got to bring conventional portraiture, documentary and montage work together. And also, what's important, field recordings and surveys that go with images, sounds, and oral histories, really, and how we bring that together. Lord knows, but hopefully you've got a taste of that today, because although they're fundamentally photographs or photo artworks or stills, they sometimes have an interpretive life. So in the Granby window, in the Open Eye window, we've got a rolling project of photos from the lockdown workshops. But the new project, today, tomorrow, and somewhere in between, that's very much open for dialogue and discussion with our participants, past, present, and future. So it's something we're very much looking forward to, and no doubt being whipped by the Granby CLC to do it in a way which is effective and inclusive, and everybody has equitable involvement.
Yeah, I think, I mean, from Open Eye, we're so happy to see that this relationship has just developed and flourished over this time. And so we're really looking forward to seeing basically what happens next. And we can kind of help promote that and get that out there as it develops. But yeah, I mean, like you say, it's kind of, I feel like it's not really going to be up to Daryl and Rebecca. It's going to be up to you guys.
That's how it should be.
Yeah,
Yeah,
our collaborators are not short of an opinion, and there's lots of them. But we're very much led by the Granby CLC, because I mean, who can not be, given their just their progress and their kind of models of excellence when it comes to placemaking and models of being and collaborative and cooperative.
And what makes a neighbourhood a home? I think that's the really big thing. That's what you guys, Joe and Teresa, that's what you guys are all about. It's that sense of what makes a neighbourhood a home, you know. And I think you know, that's
all the residents from the Georgian houses to the kind of social housing. It's just an incredible place where there's an equitable approach, and that's manifest through the markets. But I mean, that's a conversation for another day. And we thank you, Liz, for the opportunity to bring this interesting and disparate group together in a public forum, because it is such a dynamic and rich world. It really is. So thank you for the opportunity to share some of the craziness that we've been involved in, really, and lucky to be.
Yeah, thank you so much for all coming along and taking part. And as I said, we were meant to be doing this as a live stream, but it's now become a recorded thing. So if there are any questions that we get after the fact, we'll make sure we get those back to you, so that you can answer them and get them back to the people who have been listening the day after, basically. But it's just for me to say a huge thank you to all of you. And I'm really looking forward to the Granby Christmas markets and seeing what happens next. So take care,
Thank you.
everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for everybody.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.